Not many Hollywood murder mysteries ever took a more dramatic turn than police are describing in a couple of savage Beverly Hills killings. The victims were a man and his wife. He helped finance such movie hits as Rambo, First Blood, Part 2, and Red Heat. The alleged killers are, well, let Jerry Bowen tell you about it.
It had all the signs of a mafia hit when Beverly Hills police were called to the Menendez mansion that cool night last summer.
I've been in this business for over 33 years, and I've heard of very few murders that were more savage than this one was.
No signs of a break-in or a burglary, only the bodies of entertainment executive Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty in the family TV room, torn by shotgun blasts that one of the neighbor kids heard.
It sounded like...
Their college-age sons, 19-year-old Eric and 22-year-old Lyle, said they found the bodies after a night at the movies. But new evidence, ranging from records of the family psychologist to a movie script about a rich kid who kills his parents, now indicates the brothers did it.
We were waiting for the glue, if you will, to bind it all together. And just recently that glue has come about, and I feel that we have a very tight case indeed.
Police arrested Lyle at the family mansion yesterday. Younger brother Eric's reportedly returning from an overseas trip to surrender. And like the script Eric once wrote and his mother typed for him, police say the motive was apparently money, a $14 million inheritance to be shared by the brothers. An erased computer record about a will suggests the father was about to make a change. A mob hit over some shady movie deal, say police, is pure fantasy. But it's all the boy's grandmother wants to believe.
In the mafia. This is too much money. I think this is my opinion.
Both brothers may be arraigned on charges as early as Monday. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Beverly Hills.
This is Hard Copy, March 9th, 1990.
Hi, I'm Alan Frio.
And I'm Terry Murphy. It's not supposed to happen in Beverly Hills. A movie executive and his wife were brutally slain in their $1 million mansion. There were no clues and no suspects. Police speculated it was a professional hit, but now there's a shocking new development in the case. Hard Copy has learned exclusively that the Beverly Hills police have uncovered details of a murder plot as twisted as any movie mystery. Hard Copy's Doug Bruckner has the bizarre story.
Even in the somber atmosphere of their parents' funeral, Lyle and Eric Menendez were a picture of Beverly Hills glamour and style. They moved with the sons and daughters of the show business elite. The older son drove a Porsche sports car and was enrolled at Princeton. Eric Menendez had just graduated Beverly Hills High School, where his classmates included Shauna Lane Block of TV's Who's the Boss. Eric was a star himself on the school tennis team. The family's $4 million mansion was once rented by rock stars Elton John and Prince. Jose Menendez was an officer in the company that did the Rambo movies. But on August 20th, Menendez and his wife died in a fashion as brutal as Hollywood's most violent film. The murders in the first-floor family room were described by detectives as some of the most savage they'd ever seen. The killers used 12-gauge shotguns. More than a dozen blasts were fired. Suspicion focused first on organized crime. Comparisons were made to Bugsy Siegel's murder in Beverly Hills in the 1940s, a killing that was never solved. After more than 6 months of investigation, Beverly Hills police say they've solved the Menendez killings with both physical and circumstantial evidence.
The motives, of course, are buried. It's no big secret that the Menendezes had an estate that was worth millions of dollars. And then, of course, who knows what really goes on within a family.
Police declined to confirm a report that a psychologist's interview with the sons following the murder was crucial to breaking the case. The sons told police that they discovered the bodies after returning from attending a movie at a nearby shopping center. Hard Copy's been working on the story for some time, and we've learned that the probe of the sons intensified after police heard a bizarre story about a movie script which described a perfect murder. It was being talked around Hollywood by an entertainment lawyer. The lawyer, thinking that he was talking to a film producer, actually told a Hard Copy staffer that he had the inside story, and he spun a tale that implicated the Menendez sons. Hard Copy checked law enforcement sources, and they confirmed that they were aware of the lawyer and his story. According to them, one of the boys and his best friend collaborated on a screenplay about a murder that rang a bell at the Beverly Hills Police Department. In an interview last October with investigative journalist Robert Rand, Eric Menendez revealed his interest in screenplays.
In fact, I'm writing a script right now I've written 2 scripts. I'm going to surprise my dad.
Eric wrote a script about reality coming true. He had been severely beaten up in a gang fight in Calabasas, California. And he wrote a script about what would have happened if he had pressed charges. His father wouldn't let him press charges. His father was worried about retaliation against Eric and the family. The sons were always a suspect. But neighbors that I talked to in this neighborhood of multi-million-dollar mansions, people that saw Eric Menendez on the night that he came home to the house and discovered his parents' bodies, said that it was genuine, that he was rolled up in a ball, crying on the front lawn, screaming. He couldn't stop screaming. He couldn't stop crying.
As friends came and went from the Menendez home in the aftermath of the charges, others spoke of the accused sons' devotion to their slain parents. One story came from this woman who told of one of the sons speaking of his father recently and breaking into tears. Family members are convinced the sons will be able to prove their innocence. Unimpressed by all this, police charged that Eric and Lyle not only plotted the killings but carried them out, pulling the triggers on their own parents in the murders that still haunt Beverly Hills.
This is one of the most sensational crimes ever to explode in Hollywood. Hard copies on the inside track of this story.
Brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez late this afternoon were brought into a Beverly Hills courtroom and told of the charges against them.
Both brothers are being charged with both murders. We believe that both brothers were actively involved in the murder.
You believe strongly in the boy's innocence?
Extremely. You cannot imagine how strongly I believe in that. I don't have words to say how strong I feel about the complete impossibility of them having committed the act that they're accused of.
22-year-old Joseph Lyle Menendez and his 19-year-old brother Eric were charged earlier this month with 2 counts of murder each. The sons were arrested after a warrant was served on the family psychologist in search of evidence.
On behalf of Eric Menendez, we are going to vigorously defend his right to have a confidential communication with his therapist.
Investigators say one reason they began to zero in on the Menendez boys is that they didn't do a very good job of acting the roles of grieving sons. Police say the boys went on a wild spending spree, and unlike the relatives of most murder victims, the Menendez boys did not seem to take much interest in the police search for their parents' murderers.
2 California brothers have pleaded not guilty to charges they killed their wealthy parents. Lyle and Eric Menendez were arraigned yesterday on charges they murdered their parents to inherit a $14 million estate. If the brothers are convicted, they could face the death penalty.
In other news this morning, the Menendez brothers have pleaded not guilty to charges of killing their parents last August.
The defense was hoping that in suppressing the tape, they could also convince the judge that Dr. Oziel should not testify. And the judge made it clear throughout the hearings that that was not going to happen.
We always assumed that Dr. Oziel would be part of the case. That's what litigation is for. Some you win, some you lose.
But the DA admits that he is fighting for every piece of evidence to convict.
Brothers have pleaded innocent to killing their wealthy parents in 1989. If convicted, Eric and Lyle Menendez could face the death penalty. Cindy Kennard reports.
More than 3 years after the brutal Menendez slayings, the Beverly Hills brothers answered charges that they fired fatal shotgun blasts into their parents.
And Joseph Lyle Menendez, to these charges, how do you now plead?
Not guilty.
Do you admit or deny these special allegations?
Deny.
But police say Eric and Lyle Menendez are guilty of killing Jose and Kitty Menendez as they watched television in their Beverly Hills mansion. A crime, police claim, was committed to collect a $14 million inheritance. The case is finally moving closer to trial.
It's taken a long time because the California Supreme Court and the appellate courts had this case for over 2 years.
The delay ended when the higher court ruled jurors will hear audio tapes made by the brothers' psychologists, where Eric allegedly confesses he and his brother murdered their parents and fabricated an alibi. Until then, defense attorneys want the transcript sealed and out of the hands of the press.
We don't want a great rush of additional publicity. This case has been treated like a soap opera by you all for a long time, and it isn't a soap opera. This is real life.
A January hearing will decide if the Menendez brothers will be subject to the death penalty. The jury making that decision is scheduled to be picked in March. Cindy Kennard, CBS News.
August 20th, 1989, entertainment executive Jose Menendez and wife Kitty are shot repeatedly, killed in the family's Beverly Hills home. Their sons, Lyle and Eric, claim to have been at the movies, claim to have found the bodies when they returned. This is the call made to 911.
What? Who? Are they still there? Yes. The people... No. Were they shot? Eric, man, were they shot? Yes. They were shot? Yes. Let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad.
7 months later, Lyle and Eric were behind bars accused of killing their parents. Pre-trial courtroom battles followed, battles over the admissibility of evidence. One key piece, portions of audio tapes recorded by Dr. Jerome Oziel, Lyle and Eric's psychotherapist, the doctor to whom Eric allegedly confessed. Now, nearly 4 years after the murders, the young men's grandmother would be the only relative in the courtroom as jury selection for Lyle Menendez begins.
He's nervous, he's anxious, he's frightened. It's very difficult to be facing a trial where your life is at stake.
Ironically, one of the people called to serve on the jury in this case is a relative of the Menendez family. He is the first cousin of victim Jose Menendez. He appeared in court as scheduled, but was quickly dismissed.
I am impartial because I've heard both sides of the story at this point. I am not predisposed by you guys that it's just put out the negative media on it, and that's all you've done for the past 3 years.
Years of speculation about who killed Jose and Kitty Menendez and why. Attorneys for Lyle and Eric will reportedly have them claim self-defense, hoping a jury will believe they felt threatened, felt they were in danger of losing their lives.
The defense will claim the boys were abused by their parents. One defense attorney has told the judge she plans to use a self-defense strategy.
We have evidence that will prove that they were experiencing fear, that they were in imminent danger of death or great bodily injury at the hands of their parents.
Attorneys for the Menendez boys say they will use the same defense employed for battered women. Homicide is self-defense.
It is a landmark case, the use of a battered wife defense in the killing of one's parent.
When the trial of Lyle and Eric Menendez begins later today, they will attempt to put the character and reputation of their murdered parents on trial. One prosecutor is accusing the defense team of, quote, blatant character assassination.
California jury hears opening statements today in the trial of two Beverly Hills brothers accused of murdering their wealthy parents.
The unusual trial is being conducted with two juries, one for each brother.
Already the trial has drawn national media attention with scores of camera crews vying for interviews.
Gentlemen, you're really obstructing us now.
The defense is expected to begin its presentation this week.
Defense attorneys promised to take jurors behind the walls of the Menendez mansion and reveal a house of horror.
Brothers are expected to give their version of why they admittedly fired 15 shotgun blasts into their parents here at the family's Beverly Hills mansion. Defense attorneys say Lyle could begin telling that much-awaited story by the end of the week.
Killed their parents.
That's about the only undisputed fact in this sensational case. The Menendez brothers admit they murdered their wealthy parents, Jose and Kitty, surprised them and shotgunned them to death at the family mansion. Their defense? They were fighting back after years of abuse, including
repeated acts of forcible oral copulation, sodomy, and rape and the intentional infliction of pain by the use of foreign objects.
The Menendez boys are using what's come to be known as the battered child defense, saying they are no different than a battered woman who kills a violent husband out of fear for her safety. But with children, proving that is trickier.
They're going to have to be able to demonstrate, it seems to me, some form of physical abuse, the scars or remnants of which may be long since past.
The battered child defense has been used in some form in more than 15 states, with mixed results. In Texas, a 17-year-old girl who said her father sexually and physically abused her shot him to death and was acquitted. But in Indiana, a boy who killed his parents with an axe was not allowed to claim self-defense, and he was convicted.
People who kill their parents now are not seen as they used to be 10 or 15 years ago as being crazy or just being evil, the evil seed. Now there's a rhyme and a reason to it, just like with battered women.
But while the battered woman defense has gained acceptance in recent years, children who kill their parents are having less success in court.
The overwhelming majority result in guilty verdicts, so the juries are not accepting it.
In the Menendez case, the DA believes the boys killed their parents out of greed for their inheritance.
This was almost the perfect murder.
After months more of testimony, this may be the latest test of the law. Should children who say they've lived through hell be forgiven for committing the ultimate crime? Bill Lagatuda, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And all parties are present in court. The judge, the defendants, the attorneys, a key witness, and Prime 9 News.
This is Prime 9 News at 9. Southern California's most honored newscast.
Yes, we were in court because this author approached us with compelling evidence. Evidence that this key witness may have lied on the stand.
We've obtained tapes that suggest Lyle's buddy had the inside story. But in testimony today, he somehow forgot all of what he knew.
Prime 9 News brought you the exclusive story last night, and within a matter of hours, the report became part of the trial. The author became part of this upcoming book, and the witness became the focus of some serious criminal allegations. The Menendez trial draws some unlikely players into its web on this Tuesday, July 27th, 1993. Our story last night brought the Menendez brothers' murder trial to a temporary halt.
That's right. The jury was sent from the courtroom today so the judge and attorneys could talk about an audio tape we obtained and aired last night right here. The tape was an author's interview with Lyle Menendez's best friend. Now, in that 1992 interview, Donovan Goodrow said Lyle had told him there was sexual abuse in the Menendez family. That appears to contradict Goodrow's courtroom testimony yesterday. Today, he watched the Prime 9 News report played in court.
So you still have no memory of that conversation with Mr. Rand?
No, I don't.
Are you saying that that conversation never took place?
No, it obviously took place. I just don't remember the conversation.
Do you recognize your voice?
Yes, I do.
That is your voice?
Yes, it is.
The apparent contradiction is crucial because the Menendez brothers are claiming self-defense in the murder of their millionaire parents based on allegations of abuse. Journalist and author Robert Rand was ordered to give his tape-recorded interview with Goodrow to all of the attorneys in the case.
Well, tonight, Robert Rand finds himself at the center of a trial in which he was a mere observer.
Yeah, not anymore, David. Rand had tried to keep his tape recording from attorneys, saying because he is a journalist, he was protected under state law. But the judge apparently disagreed. Jim Hill, he picks up the story now for us. Jim?
Well, Pat and David, Robert Rand is writing a book on the Menendez case. In our exclusive story yesterday, he revealed key witness Donovan Goodrow apparently lied on the witness stand. Today, Rand himself became a witness.
Dinner that Jose Menendez.
When Robert Rand looked at a videotape of Donovan Goodrow's courtroom testimony yesterday, he had a pointed observation.
It appears that he has perjured himself.
Goodrow had testified he never heard Lyle Menendez say he was sexually abused by his father, Jose Menendez. But Rand had a taped interview in which Goodrow said Lyle had in fact told of sexual abuse.
He told me about his father. And
Basically, he said that his father had been abusing Eric.
Yeah, him and Eric. And
Lyle also.
Yeah, and would take baths with him and stuff like that. I just, oh man, you're at this, it's weird.
All right, you're still under oath, Mr. Rand.
Today in court, Rand found himself called to the witness stand. Judge Stanley Weisberg ordered him to give up the taped interview with Goodrow to the court.
Did you not testify this morning that the materials you accumulated in this interview were accumulated in connection and solely in connection with the book that you were preparing?
He ruled that Rand, the author of a book, is not covered by California's so-called SHIELD law, which normally protects a reporter's sources and unpublished material from subpoena.
Well, I think this is a very unfortunate situation. I think it's a very dark day for journalists in California.
A look at the SHIELD law shows it covers a publisher, editor, reporter, or newspaper, magazine, and wire service employees, as well as radio and TV reporters. It doesn't mention book authors.
At the time that the SHIELD laws came into existence in California and elsewhere, people really weren't thinking in terms of book authors, and so it was just omitted by inadvertence, I believe.
An inadvertence that may have made an author a chapter in his own book. Now, Rand may find himself asked to turn over more tapes. He's interviewed hundreds of people in 4 years of researching the Menendez story, including interviews with Lyle and Eric Menendez. Pat, David?
All right, Jim. Not over yet.
All right, let's talk about the Menendez trial. There's controversial tape here, tape
of the psychiatrist talking to the boys? We've talked a little bit before about whether or not it was going to be admitted. How big an impact is, because the jury is now hearing some of this, how big an impact?
Well, it's difficult to say. The prosecutors fought for 3 years to get a hold of these tapes, and the defense fought back just very hard to try and keep them from getting it. They now have it. Something interesting, though, when the prosecutors finally got to listen to the tapes, they decided they didn't like them just as much as they thought they would. And so, in fact, only the jury for Lyle Menendez has heard the tape. The jury for Eric Menendez will not hear them, and that's the decision of the prosecutor.
Okay, let's listen to a little bit of the tape of Lyle talking about killing his mother with his psychiatrist.
She had given me permission to police carry out her suicide, and that it was obvious that she had decided in her mind she wants to die. She can't do it.
How did that play from the jury, at least from what people in the courtroom could observe?
Well, what the prosecutors want to show with this tape is that Lyle Menendez told a different story from the one he told on the witness stand when he was talking about it to the psychologist Jerome Oziel. He says he killed his mom because she wanted to commit suicide anyway, and he felt he had her permission almost, and that he had to do it if he was going to kill the father. That's not what he told the jury. He told the jury that he was in imminent fear for his life. It was kill or be killed, and that's why he went in and used the shotgun on his parents.
All right, we also have tape of Eric expressing remorse about killing his father.
He was somebody that I loved, and almost had no choice to do what I did. And I hate myself for doing it.
So now you're saying that this tape hasn't been heard in court, though?
Well, no, the tape has been heard by the jury for Lyle Menendez, but not by the jury for Eric Menendez. There are two separate juries in this trial, and Eric's jury was excused. What you just heard there on the tape, I think, is an example of why the prosecutors don't want the Eric Menendez jury to hear it. He's showing remorse. He's crying. He may even seem sympathetic, they fear. And so they don't want to play it and are not playing it for his jury.
All right, and we have another tape of Lyle making a statement.
All the little good things, like I said, I think one of the biggest pains you have is that you miss just having these people around. I miss not having my dog around. I think it makes such a gross analogy.
What is the jury going to make of that?
Well, I think the prosecutors hope that they will see a callous young man, insensitive, talking in a lighthearted or maybe inappropriate way about the killings of his parents. And the problem with these tapes, though, Harry, is the story the boys tell is not the story either side wants. They don't tell the story that the defense says about imminent danger, life being threatened, but they also don't tell the story that the prosecution says is true, which is that they did it for money, that it was a cold-blooded murder for cash. And so the jury may end up being more confused by hearing these tapes than anything at all.
And just when you thought it couldn't get any more confusing with the introduction of all of these tapes and one jury hearing it and not the other jury, the psychiatrist's former mistress, she's going to talk?
Yes, this trial, there's nothing that's too much at this trial, it seems. The defense is calling the ex-mistress, Judalon Smith, of the psychologist that you hear on these tapes. Judalon Smith says that Jerome Oziel is a manipulative person who was trying to blackmail the brothers, basically, into giving him part of the money they were inheriting, and he was threatening to go to the police, she says, unless they did that. And so this is the defense's way of explaining why Dr. Jerome Oziel is lying on the stand. She started her testimony on Friday. It's going to continue today.
It's worse than a miniseries. Christian Jeanette Myers, thank you so much for joining us. At the sensational Menendez brothers murder trial in California, the jury is now hearing from friends and relatives of the defendants. Jody Baskerville of KCBS TV reports on the latest testimony.
Lyle Menendez testified he told his best friend, Donovan Goudreau, about the alleged sexual abuse by his father, Jose, just 3 months before his parents were killed. But when Goudreau got back on the witness stand, he contradicted Lyle's testimony.
Did he say anything to you about his father having molested both him and his brother?
No, I would have remembered that.
But then defense attorney Jill Lansing played an audio tape of an interview Donovan Goudreau did with author Robert Rand last year.
I guess maybe one of the reasons we were friends is because we had so much in common with this, where we suffered, experience, and then to bring this into the relationship as far as an experience we both shared that we'd never spoken to or about to anybody.
So basically, he said that his father had been abusing Eric.
Yeah,
Abusing Eric.
Yeah, him and Eric. And
Lyle.
Yeah, and we take bats and stuff.
After he listened to the tape recording, Donovan Goudreau said he didn't remember whether what he said during that interview was the truth or not. Jody Baskerville for CBS News.
Also in Los Angeles, the prosecution is wrapping up its case in the Menendez brothers' murder trial. Yesterday, Eric, the younger of the two brothers who admit to killing their parents, was on the witness stand where he was grilled about his claim that the murders followed years of sexual abuse. KCBS TV reporter Jody Baskerville has the story.
According to Eric Menendez, the death of his father ended 12 years of sexual abuse. According to the prosecution, the alleged abuse is all part of a scheme to escape the gas chamber.
Are there any witnesses to this molestation?
Was anyone in the room?
Yes.
No.
In fact, the only person that could deny or contest your claim is your father, correct?
My father and my mother.
And both of them are dead, correct?
Yes.
Prosecutor Lester Kuriyama tried to wear down his witness by repeating the same questions, but it wasn't long before Judge Weisberg simply had enough.
As far as the repetitive nature of the examination, Mr. Kuriyama, let's see if we can avoid that. There's certainly a permissible scope of that during cross-examination, but you are getting, in certain areas, to repetitive questioning that is unduly time-consuming, so let's see if we can speed it up a little bit.
For the second time, the cross-examination of Eric Menendez was interrupted by illness. Both prosecutors have the flu. Tomorrow is expected to be Eric's last day on the stand. Jody Baskerville for CBS News.
A tape police interview became the focus of attention at the trial of two brothers accused of killing their millionaire parents in 1989. Eric Menendez is heard telling police he had no idea who would harm his family. Yesterday, defense lawyers admitted the Menendez brothers killed their parents but blamed it on years of abuse.
I'm kind of obsessed with the trial. It's a real interesting trial, and I want them to be acquitted.
Older brother Lyle, younger brother Eric.
I think they're really cute. I think Eric Menendez and his brother are very nice looking. Lyle.
The Beverly Hills brothers, who admit to killing their rich parents, are attracting a following.
I was really amazed. It's crazy here.
Law student Julie Dolan drove from San Diego to try and get a seat inside the courtroom.
When I came here to want to see some of the best defense and best prosecution, I was really surprised at kind of the groupies that have been here for a while.
She arrived at 6:30 in the morning, only to learn that others, what she describes as courtroom groupies, had already taken their place in the fourth-floor courtroom corridor. It's gotten to the point where some people do just about anything to get into Judge Weisberg's courtroom just to see and hear the Menendez boys.
I think that it would probably make it more real, because when you watch it on TV, it looks like a movie, like it's not real life. And you have to keep remembering that these aren't actors pretending to be the Menendez brothers. They're actually them who actually had this happen.
If they were convicted, I'd like to visit them in prison.
You're kidding.
No.
Why would you like to do that?
To see what their side of the story is and be a friend to them.
Tried and true courtroom observers might cringe at the thought of losing a seat to someone more impressed by the sensationalism of this case rather than the legal strategy. But the trial watchers promised to continue arriving just to say they were there. In Van Nuys, Tony Ginyard, Channel 9 News.
Court TV records viewer comments, and since the trial began 5 months ago, the line is often clogged with callers interested in the Menendez case. And just who's calling? Men and women on both sides of the case, those who believe the brothers are innocent.
They're calling in to say, give these guys more credit. You can't make up stuff like this.
And those who find them guilty.
Those kids are absolute lying brats, a string of four-letter words.
Even the prosecutor's office gets up to 50 calls a day.
Under cross-examination in Los Angeles, Lyle Menendez admitted his parents said nothing threatening in the moments before he and his brother killed them. Menendez took the stand for an eighth day of testimony. He and his brother admit shooting their wealthy parents with a shotgun as they watched television.
Well, I didn't put it up against his head on purpose. I just don't remember it, but I know that I did that because of the picture, and I know that was me in that area. But I have no memory of actually doing that.
Prosecutors say the brothers acted out of simple greed for the inheritance. Lyle Menendez says he and his brother suffered years of sexual and emotional abuse.
More news now this morning. The Southern California murder trial of Lyle and Eric Menendez has taken another strange twist. Jody Baskerville of station KCBS reports the defense now contends the brothers killed their parents because years of abuse rewired their brains.
The three brain regions that are most important in the limbic system.
The human brain has taken center stage in the defense of Eric and Lyle Menendez. Expert witness Dr. Ann Tyler claims the brothers were so traumatized by years of alleged abuse, it actually changed the gray matter inside their heads.
What is important in traumatized populations is they begin to read the cues differently. This is what we call the rewiring, and they will read more danger into cues than necessarily a non-traumatized population.
On the night of August 20th, 1989, according to the defense, that rewiring is what caused Eric and Lyle Menendez to kill their parents, who were apparently unarmed and watching TV. Very similar to the battered wife syndrome.
Do abused and molested children tend to leave the home routinely?
No, they don't.
On cross-examination, prosecutor Pam Bozanich implied the brain change theory, at least in this case, was about as credible as, say, the research of Dr. Frankenstein.
Now, in this particular case, there is no test that you can give to these particular defendants to determine whether or not they have undergone genetic recoding as a response to fear.
That's correct at this point in time.
A California jury heard dramatic testimony this week in the trial of two brothers accused of gunning down their parents. For days, the elder son has testified about sexual abuse, and then he described the night of the murders. Jerry Bowen has our report.
To a hushed courtroom, 25-year-old Lyle Menendez gave his first public account of that summer night in 1989 when his parents were shotgunned to death.
I ran upstairs to tell my brother that it was happening now and that this was it, and they were going to kill us. And at some point I said, I'm going to get my gun. And he said he would get his gun. And
it was kill or be killed, Menendez testified, saying that he and his younger brother Eric had threatened to go public about years of alleged sexual abuse at the hands of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. Lyle and Eric decided to strike before their parents could, attacking them in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion.
We fired lots of, many times, and there were just glass, and you could hear things breaking, and you could hear the ringing noises from the booms, and there was the smoke from the guns, and it was basically just chaos, and I really...
Prosecutors say the brothers killed their parents out of greed for the family's $14 million fortune. But the defense contends that after years of sexual, psychological, and physical abuse by both parents, the killing was an act of self-defense.
I ran around and shot my mom.
Where did you shoot her?
I just reached over and I shot her close.
Legal scholars say this self-defense is extremely difficult to prove, especially since the brothers were young adults when they murdered their parents 4 years ago.
If they should testify that they were facing an imminent threat that very evening of serious bodily harm, then, if the jury believes that, self-defense would be appropriate.
Eric Menendez has yet to testify in this trial, which is expected to last until Thanksgiving. Unless they can convince the jury they were potential victims, the brothers could be sentenced to death if convicted in the slaying of their parents. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
You're right, Carol. She was relentless in there. There was not a wasted word, not a wasted gesture. It was breathtaking in the courtroom to just be pounded and pounded with as much intellectual precision and moral outrage as Pamela Bozanich summoned this morning in marshaling her case for a first-degree murder conviction. And you could almost see her transform Lyle Menendez before the jurors' eyes from the crying, troubled, and frightened child that he appeared before them last night at the close of his own lawyer's closing argument into the bad guy, as she described him in this case. As she painted a picture of him as evil and as dangerous, you saw a number of times a number of the jurors look over him for a long time and case him out, as it were. She was doing the job she needed to do in there. She didn't, and she said that she was saving her discussion of Kitty Menendez for her final argument, her rebuttal closing argument, and it was wise because clearly that is the real problem in this case for the Menendez brothers. And what Pamela Bozanich seemed to do was save a lot of her evidence and her outrage, really, for the final words that she would have before this jury. Those pictures of Kitty Menendez that she put on the bulletin board were also kind of a response to what Jill Lansing did yesterday. All day yesterday, there were pictures of Kitty Menendez that the defense had dug up, which were slightly suggestive. They were pictures from Kitty Menendez's youth, one in a bathing suit, the other in some kind of teddy, I guess, and the clear implication, although never directly stated, was that this was a woman capable, as Lyle Menendez had accused her of seducing him or trying to seduce him. And what Pamela Bozanich did is show that this was a woman who was butchered. It is the first time we've heard that explanation, and it was quite a stroke of courtroom tactics. She had those pictures once again before her on the board yesterday, as the whole country did, the pictures of Lyle and Eric Menendez naked when they were boys. And here from the same roll, she picked out an obviously amateurish, childish photo of a dishwasher and compared the height from which those pictures were taken. That's something that she must have figured out in advance and must have been saving really as a blow in her closing argument. It was quite effective. The mood of the courtroom as trial ended yesterday was just drained. It was yet another of those days, and we've had a lot of them in this case, where people are just wrenched emotionally at the close of a day. Jill Lansing clearly cares for this young man a great deal, and she believes pretty much, it seems, everything he is saying. She communicated that very effectively with her own tears, and then as she talked about how Lyle Menendez testified that he feels he's betrayed his father, as he cried, the courtroom once again got that almost stomach-churning emotion going on in there. And as we filed out last night, it was with great gentleness almost. That something bad had happened, something emotional. And today, Pamela Bozanich just gave the jurors a real problem, a real heartache. They're going to have a lot of work to overcome yesterday's emotion and today's real outrage. Well, she dealt with Jose Menendez pretty much the way that she has to, given the amount of evidence that has come in from his relatives who may not have testified against him were he alive, and from business associates and teachers, people who met him once. He was apparently a very difficult man. She made one of those occasional lapses in taste that she does when she said that he had a Latin temper, and therefore one can understand how he might frighten his children, or he might, but he never put them in the hospital, was her point. There were a couple of wide eyes on the jury at that point. But she said the world might be a better place without him, but it wasn't the defendant's job to take him out of the world. And although she can't defend him, she clearly doesn't think that Lyle Menendez had a right to kill him. That was another of Pamela Bozanich's kind of sarcastic jokes, and it was one that she really drove home, the no human involved. It's a sick joke. She acknowledged it was. It does, however, fit her view of this defense, which is that the dead people in this case have been trashed, mercilessly trashed, and that's not right. It's not right, she believes, when prosecutors talk about drug dealers who've been killed, and it's not right in this case. It seemed to be an effective point. It was certainly very dramatically made with the gigantic 3 letters that she held up before the jury. It's hard for me to tell, but it does look like I would guess there are perhaps a couple of people who have some Hispanic ancestry, and that might have bothered them. It's something, though, that she just didn't need to push. She was making a fine point that these defendants were never scalded or beaten or sent to the hospital, as so many abused children have been. And to throw in the crack about Latin tempers seemed to be just a reach too far. It, in the end, probably won't damage her at all, though. That's about right. He said that there should be an hour and a half to 2 hours of instructions. He's going to give the jurors a break in the middle of them. They are, as most instructions are in murder cases, they're long and complicated, and they're very important concepts. Concepts that the jurors, at this point, it looks like they are dying to get a hold of, believe it or not. At this point, after all this evidence, they're wondering, what are we supposed to do with it now? And they are ready to hear the judge's instructions on the law. They should take a while, and then probably after lunch, Lyle Menendez's jury will begin deliberating his fate. Today, it's quiet here. There are plenty of open seats. That'll probably get a stampede down here in Van Nuys, but it's strangely quiet in there today. There are just a couple of relatives and really a lot of open seats in the public area. Well, June, you know, in a trial that's this long, after the jurors have gotten to know all the participants this well, in closing arguments, lawyers really reap what they sow. If they have been combative and deliberately abrasive in the courtroom, they will have to overcome that or use it to their advantage. If they have been, like Pamela Bozanich has at times in the courtroom, somewhat catty at times, even spatting with Judalon Smith from the counsel's bench while Judalon Smith was on the witness table, she has to deal with that. And Jill Lansing is really reaping the benefits of her formality and her grace throughout this trial. The jurors like her. It's clear. They are listening to her. There are a number that smile when she wants them to and are sort of following what she's saying. Now, whether or not it's making any difference at all in how they're assessing the evidence is another matter, but at least as far as how she's conducted herself throughout this trial, it's probably paying off up there for her. Well, what Jill Lansing has got to do is take the jurors, as she said, into the mind of Lyle Menendez, and into the mind not of a grown man, a 25-year-old man who's shotgunned his parents to death, but into the mind of a frightened little boy, into the mind of a child whose life was completely dominated, she says, by this family, and who could be brought to a point of panic. And that's a challenge. And what Jill Lansing is doing to overcome it is really calling, I think, on her own experiences. She herself is a mother and really has a connection to this case through that. She said a couple of times as she described Kitty and Jose Menendez, would you let these people raise your children? And she is calling on the jurors' sense of parental responsibility, on how children are supposed to be treated, and how she says her client was, and how that really explains what's happened here. Well, it's very much a close and very deep relationship, really, that Jill Lansing and Lyle Menendez have. If Leslie Abramson is hot, if she is hugging and very passionate in some ways in court, demonstrative, I guess is the word I'm looking for, Jill Lansing is more warm. She is very closely connected to Lyle Menendez. There were times when she has spoken in the corridors and in the cafeteria about him and almost come to the verge of tears when she thinks about what happened to him when he was a little boy, when he was the age that her child is now. So you can tell that she really believes in him. There are a lot of people who don't. There are a lot of people who just consider what he's saying a total fabrication, but there isn't an iota of doubt in Jill Lansing's mind that she represents a victim and that she wants to do something to reconstitute a life that she believes was irrevocably shattered. Well, the defense seems to think that Pamela Bozanich's closing argument could have been a lot worse. They felt that it was somewhat disjointed, and even though Pamela Bozanich did present the evidence that she has, and it's there for a first-degree murder conviction, they felt that her tone was a mistake, that the jokes and the wisecracks, the personal references that she made a number of times, the very demeaning tone that she took to a number of witnesses was wrong. That at this point, after this much of the trial, the jurors are ready for something more serious and more substantive, and they felt that her flip comments were a mistake for her. So I think that the defense feels that things could have been a lot worse given what the evidence in this case is. Well, June, you're absolutely right. That chart is about as close as either of the lawyers in Lyle Menendez's case are going to get to telling the jurors to disregard the law. The jurors in this case have no legal grounding to acquit Lyle Menendez. The judges found that as a matter of law, this is an unlawful homicide. It's up to the jurors to decide what kind of unlawful homicide, manslaughter or murder. But what Michael Burt did was suggest on that chart that there was an option, that on each, and there will be on the jury forms, on each charge there will be a guilty and not guilty checkoff box, even right down to the bottom charge, involuntary manslaughter. So it's conceivable that the jurors could check off not guilty right down the line, and that's what he was somewhat slyly suggesting to them. The other thing he suggested, which was quite effective as a piece of courtroom tactics really, is at the very end of his long closing argument where he discussed all this law. It's about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and the jurors were really antsy by this time. And then he started discussing what would happen if the jurors came back with a first-degree murder conviction and special circumstances. He said, well, then we'd have a new trial. And he went into all the detail as to how much evidence would be brought in this new trial to determine whether or not Lyle Menendez should be put to death. And he clearly had that planned for the end of the day, just to get the jurors when they're at their most vulnerable in considering how much more of this they want to go through. It's been such a huge story, you know, around the world. There are reporters from France and Great Britain here, as well as all the tabloid shows, all the local national news coverage. Time magazine has showed up.
In Los Angeles, 2 juries resume deliberations tomorrow in the highly publicized trial of the Menendez brothers. The juries received the cases last week. The brothers, accused of murdering their wealthy parents, had a single trial with separate juries. Jerry Bowen reports.
The Menendez murder trial has been a case of attempted role reversal. The accused, brothers Lyle and Eric, portrayed as the real victims of the rich Beverly Hills parents they shot and killed in August of 1989.
These people are dead, and they were killed by their own children. Now, you have to ask, if you knew nothing else, what went on in that family for that to happen?
Represented by separate attorneys and on trial before separate juries, the tennis-playing brothers claimed they were victims of years of sexual abuse.
You're telling Lyle what?
My dad had been molesting me.
The brothers say they plan to go public with their stories of abuse, and fearing their parents, Jose and Kitty, were about to kill to stop them, Lyle and Eric struck first with shotguns.
I ran around and shot my mom.
Where did you shoot her?
I just reached over and I shot her close.
But prosecutors say the brothers' real fear was being cut out of their parents' $14 million estate.
Eric feared, all right, he feared that he would have to get off of his butt and work just like all the rest of us.
And their parents were continuing to support them in their lifestyle, support them while they screwed up, support them while they were spoiled, vicious brats.
What's the problem? Someone killed my parents. Pardon me?
Initially, the brothers blamed underworld hitmen. Then,
insofar as he knew, it was a perfect murder. There was no way to link he or Lyle to having committed the murder.
They confessed in confidence to their psychologist, and when that tape-recorded admission became evidence, the brothers then said it was a matter of self-defense.
And do you really think that child abuse justifies murder?
2 juries are considering that question, considering whether abuse actually occurred. What they decide will determine the penalties, which range from more prison time to death. Jerry Bowen, CBS.
In other news this morning, 2 Los Angeles juries are deliberating the fate of the Menendez brothers, who admit they shot their wealthy parents to death in 1989. Eric, 23, and his brother Lyle, 25, killed their parents in their Beverly Hills mansion. The prosecution contends they did it for the money, a $14 million family fortune. The defense says it was self-defense following years of sexual and psychological abuse.
Tomorrow in this country, 2 juries resume their deliberations in the Menendez murder case.
The judge's instructions to both juries make not guilty verdicts legally impossible.
The judge will give them the option of convicting the brothers on charges ranging from voluntary manslaughter to murder in the first degree.
Still no verdict from the two juries in the Menendez brothers' murder trials. The jury for Lyle Menendez has completed 16 days of deliberations, and the jury for Eric Menendez has finished 14.
What does it say when the deliberations have gone on so many days that you're saying you still have a chance?
They're still deliberating, aren't they?
3 weeks and they haven't budged. It has been our suspicion that there was some deep division. I guess this is as deep as it goes.
Tonight, with the Eric Menendez jury deadlocked, a mistrial has been declared in his case.
In Los Angeles today, a mistrial for Lyle Menendez.
Clancy, your thoughts on a possible retrial? Do you think this is going to end?
Take Los Angeles, for instance, including the case that came back to court in Los Angeles just today involving two defendants accused of murdering their wealthy parents. Correspondent Bill Whitaker has the story of L.A. law.
Lyle and Eric Menendez were back in court today, preparing for retrial. A panelist from the first hung jury called it a waste of taxpayers' money.
I do not think a decision can be reached. It's too divisive an issue, there's too much information, and I think that the district attorney should just end it.
But prosecutors vow to end it with murder convictions this time. There's heightened pressure on the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office to win this round, to reverse a humiliating decade-long run of high-profile defeats. Such as the McMartin preschool molestation case, the Twilight Zone movie manslaughter case, the first Rodney King trial, the Reginald Denny beating trial, and most recently Menendez, all seen as losses for the DA. Jury consultant Joellen Demetrius worked on the winning side in Denny, King, and McMartin.
I've heard these comments by people in the community. You know, I can go out and blow somebody away and be able to walk away from it. People have a real distrust of the whole office.
Observers say the DA often is simply outlawyered by high-powered defense attorneys or piles on hard-to-prove charges hoping for a home run.
Every once in a while, maybe they ought to try to get a triple. And instead of overcharging, put your best people forward and go for the best thing that you can.
The new DA says a few notorious cases do not tell the whole story.
Over the last 10 years, we've handled at least 500,000 felony cases. We have a 94% conviction rate.
The perception of the public will be shaped primarily by a very few unusual cases, not by the daily workings of the district attorney's office.
Yet another loss could further erode public trust in justice for all. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Another hearing leading up to the trial of Lyle and Eric Menendez, and still few decisions are being made. The entire morning session centering around freelance journalist Robert Rand and tape-recorded interviews he made with Eric Menendez and one-time prosecution witness Donovan Goudreau. The prosecution wants the tapes, wants to know what was said, while attorneys representing the brothers are on the sidelines for this issue.
Donovan Goudreau at trial testified that Lyle had never made statements to him to the effect that his father had molested him, and in fact he told Robert Rand 2 years earlier that Lyle had told him those things. So obviously it's important to the defense because Donovan Goudreau was not completely truthful at the first trial.
But now they're preparing for trial number 2, and attorneys representing the brothers are trying to keep a tape-recorded therapy session made by the therapist to whom Eric confessed out of court. Even though the tape was played during the first trial, defense attorneys don't want jurors to hear it during the retrial.
So we have to start from scratch, and we have to again deal with evidentiary issues, including when, if ever, that tape may be introduced.
Department in Van Nuys Superior Court. People crowded around the door trying to get a front row seat to see Lyle and Eric Menendez. They are back in court again, this time to set a new trial date. But it never happened. Judge Stanley Weisberg put off the decision until the presiding judge of the Superior Court Criminal Division determines if the defense attorneys for the brothers will be appointed by the court. The defense attorneys say the brothers have no money to pay their legal fees.
I can't do a 5-month trial pro bono. I don't think anyone should be expected to, and California case law indicates you can't ask lawyers to work for free.
But Abramson is already planning, preparing to defend Eric Menendez again. She still believes her client will not be convicted of first-degree murder.
I still believe that if these clients are competently represented, if they have funds available to put on an adequate defense, that they can't be convicted of first-degree murder.
Prosecutor David Kahn is making one thing clear: the state will be seeking the death penalty.
Because when you kill two people under the circumstances that the two victims were killed in this case, the death penalty is an appropriate punishment.
Rooting for Kahn will be Jude Nelson.
I'm sucked into it. I'm as interested as you or anybody else is. I was drawn into it. I've seen all the evidence, and I'm angered and frustrated and all of that, the outcome of the last two juries.
He is one of the former Lyle Menendez jurors. He returned to court this time as a spectator.
It was deliberate, premeditated, malicious, first-degree double homicide.
The first trial of brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez lasted nearly 6 months long and ended with deadlocked juries. Now it begins again. This time the trial will have a different focus and a new look. Prosecutor David Kahn promises a different approach to the case.
One thing that we have asked the judge to do is to limit the so-called abuse excuse, to limit evidence that has nothing to do with this case, limit evidence going back years and years, because the defendants themselves say that they did not kill their parents because they were abused. What they said was that they killed their parents because they were in fear of their parents.
The prosecutor is wrong. The brothers were afraid at the time they shot their parents, and they were afraid because they had been threatened with death by these people and had been abused by them their entire lives. And abuse is only the issue insofar as it explains why they were actually afraid of them.
During the first trial, jurors were swayed by photographs and graphic testimony of alleged sexual, physical, and emotional abuse of Lyle and Eric at the hands of their parents. Now the challenge for attorneys on both sides: finding a jury of 12 people who have not been influenced by prior coverage of this high-profile case. It's a challenge Eric's attorney believes is near impossible based on a public opinion study.
The result of it was overwhelmingly negative. People are full of misapprehensions about the case and false facts and all kinds of other problems. So I think our biggest challenge here is whether or not the system of justice is going to work the way it's supposed to.
But Deputy DA David Kahn is optimistic an unbiased jury can and will be found.
Well, every jury is different. It's not unusual that a jury could vote one way on a particular case, and another jury picked to try the same case and hearing the same evidence might come back entirely different. So we can't just look to the evidence presented in the first trial and assume the jury would rule exactly the same way.
In Los Angeles, this is day 2 of jury selection in the retrial of Eric and Lyle Menendez in the 1989 shotgun deaths of their parents. The brothers confessed to killing their parents, but claim they acted in self-defense after years of sexual abuse. Their first trial ended last year when jurors deadlocked. Selection of a new jury is expected to take a month.
Lyle was there.
The Menendez trial was broadcast live on Court TV across the country last time. This is the Menendez trial the second time around. Only a still camera captures the action. TV cameras are not allowed. Apparently a reaction to the perceived excesses of the Simpson trial and concern for an unsequestered jury.
They have to let me go to court.
Some first trial veterans were back, like defense attorney Leslie Abramson, and there were newcomers to the case, like prosecutor David Kahn.
One thing that we want to stress is the horror and the brutality of the crime, a fact that we feel argues against the sort of defense that has been presented in this case and argues in favor of a premeditated and cold-blooded killing.
Prosecutors were taken by surprise last time by the emotional impact of the child abuse defense on the jury. The defense claimed Lyle and Eric Menendez were abused by their parents and killed out of fear.
There was only one truth before the first trial. There's only one truth now. Of course, we're not changing what our defense is because there's only one truth, and that's what this jury is going to hear, and we're very, very happy with this jury. And we think they will listen to that truth, and they will see behind the soap opera silliness of the prosecution's theory.
The prosecution seems to be taking a different tack this time, one that seems to say, even if the Menendez brothers were abused, what difference does it make?
Once again, they intend to talk a lot about abuse, and the jury is going to have to decide what did the abuse have to do with the events of that particular day.
Prosecutor Kahn says things should be easier the second time around because he knows the defense's case. But Abramson warns him not to be so sure. they've still got some surprises in store.
Eric and Lyle Menendez are back in court today for the retrial in Los Angeles.
The Menendez brothers. In the first trial, 2 juries, one for each of the brothers, hung, unable to choose between manslaughter and murder.
We believe in our professional judgment, my professional judgment, the evidence warrants a conviction of murder in the first degree.
Clear desperation for a conviction. Win one for the Gipper.
The Gipper being District Attorney Gil Garcetti, whose office has been criticized for losing a string of high-profile cases recently, including that of rapper Snoop Doggy Dogg, O.J. Simpson, and the original Menendez trial.
The prosecution is differing this time in that they are focusing so much on the really gruesome, ugly details of what 2 shotguns can do to 2 people.
I think that we have now seen the defense take their best shot. We have the advantage of hindsight. We know exactly where they're going. There are no more surprises. No medical evidence whatsoever to corroborate the claim of the defendants. There are no eyewitnesses. So how can they really say that the defendants are telling the truth concerning the allegations?
Allegations of abuse that deadlocked the first juries are largely banned from the second trial.
The judge just whittles away at our defense, makes it smaller and smaller and smaller, and this jury doesn't have as much information as the last juries had. Taking place in the courtroom today was a clear effort on the part of the prosecution to prevent this jury from hearing the truth of Eric's life. Constant objection.
I objected because I don't think that the judge has to allow a witness to cry as much as he wants to while everyone just sits in the courtroom waiting for him to stop.
Such an obvious ploy that they're trying to dehumanize, these brothers in order to desperately get a conviction.
That's right. We will only get
Prosecutor David Kahn said he feels good as deliberations begin and predicted this jury will convict Lyle and Eric Menendez.
When you look at the cold, callous nature of the killings in this case, how the defendants, in the view of the prosecution, not only premeditated the killing of their parents, but by the way that they executed them in such a cold-blooded fashion and then participated in a cover-up which continued for years afterwards. I think that is sufficient for the jury to find that the defendants are in fact cold-blooded killers who do deserve the death penalty.
Kahn says there were major differences in this trial and the first trial. The prosecution, he says, provided new testimony that reconstructed how Lyle and Eric Menendez carried out the shotgun killings of their parents back in August of 1989. And he says a leading forensic psychiatrist shot down the defense's mental state defense.
It has been hell.
That's Leslie Abramson, Eric Menendez's lawyer. She not only blasted the prosecution, but she also accused Judge Stanley Weisberg of cutting out the heart of the defense's case.
Our whole theory of the defense, which was a theory of self-defense, imperfect self-defense, he refused to instruct on it. And our fallback theory of manslaughter, which was provocation theory, he refused to instruct on the mother. And we felt she was just as provocative as the father. He took that out of the hands of the jury.
And if the jury finds the Menendez brothers guilty of first-degree murder, Abramson says she will appeal on several grounds.
But if it comes out badly for us, I don't think that has anything to do with the truth.
Are you confident?
I'm not confident. I have no idea what's going to happen. I've never been in this position before where I was unable to actually put on my case and unable to get the instructions that under all the case authority apply.
Good evening. Tonight, the place of murder, justice, and outrage in America. And we'll begin in California, where this time the stories of abuse, incest, and psychological terror didn't work. This time, a Los Angeles jury went beyond the tearful testimony of brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez and found them guilty of the shotgun murders of their mother and father.
After less than 4 days deliberating, the jury reached verdicts in the second Menendez murder trial. Lyle and Eric Menendez, both guilty of the first-degree murders of their mother and father, both guilty of the special circumstances of lying in wait and committing multiple murders, both guilty of conspiring to commit murder. The verdict brought smiles to the faces of District Attorney Gil Garcetti and to others inside the DA's office. And although Judge Stanley Weisberg issued a gag order prohibiting attorneys or witnesses from discussing the case, others who have watched from inside the courtroom were more than willing to share their opinions.
In the first trial, the parents were the ones who are on trial, who could not defend themselves. There was a lot of money to conjure up a very fancy defense, and that's why I feel there was a hung jury in the first trial.
Author Robert Rand has followed this case since day one and during the course of his research befriended the brothers.
I spoke with Lyle a few days ago, and he told me that he was willing to accept the jury's decision, but he was optimistic, he was hopeful that he was going to receive a second-degree conviction on Jose and an acquittal on Kitty.
But that was not to be, and law professor Stan Goldman believes there are many issues on which the defense can appeal.
The judge not only didn't allow the defense to put on a certain amount of the so-called abuse excuse, I know a term the defense isn't fond of, it also didn't allow them to put on the older brother Lyle's testimony by way of transcripts from the first trial, which they had a pretty good argument they ought to be allowed to use, and nor did he allow the jury to really consider manslaughter the way that the first jury was allowed to consider it.
The story started off as two brutal murders in the most unlikely of places, Beverly Hills. Record executive Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty shot to death, their bodies discovered by their sons.
What? Who? Are they still there? Yes. The people... No. Were they shot?
Hey, man,
were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
Let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad. But soon the cries of sorrow turned into a multi-million-dollar shopping spree by Lyle and Eric Menendez, and that led police to their doorstep. It also led to one of the most sensational trials in history.
What did you do after you reloaded?
I ran around and shot my mom. The brothers admitted killing their parents. First, their father with a shotgun blast to the head, then reloading and killing their mother. They said they only did it after years of physical, mental, and sexual abuse.
He would put me on my knees and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
For 5 months in 1993, the courtroom became the stage of a family drama. Prosecutors tried to convince the jury the brothers did it all for money, but the two juries weren't convinced.
We are unable to reach unanimous verdicts as to the charges in counts 1, 2, and 3.
First, Eric's jury came back deadlocked, then Lyle's.
We regret to inform the court that we are unable to come to a unanimous decision on any of these 3 counts.
It led to a bold prediction from defense attorney Leslie Abramson.
I do not believe any jury will ever convict Eric Menendez of first-degree murder. And I never did think that would happen.
But the prosecution wasn't convinced, trying the brothers a second time. This time, Judge Stanley Weisberg clamped down. No cameras, 1 jury, and no voluntary manslaughter on Kitty Menendez.
Surprised he doesn't just take out a rifle in the courtroom and shoot him.
Attorneys after the first Menendez trial were extremely vocal.
Jurors were swayed by their emotions and were persuaded by the defense.
I do not believe any jury will ever convict Eric Menendez of first-degree murder.
But this time around, a gesture from District Attorney Gil Garcetti is the only reaction. That's because Judge Stanley Weisberg is not letting anyone talk. He granted a defense-requested gag order despite protests from the prosecution.
I think Leslie Abramson is smart enough to know that Gil Garcetti, who's running for re-election, was speeding down to the courthouse as soon as he knew he had a guilty verdict. And she did not want this to become more of a zoo than it already is at the expense of her clients.
Blair Bernholt says there is a good chance the media coverage could prejudice the unsequestered jury against Eric and Lyle Menendez. She says this is a crucial stage, that the penalty phase will be handled just like a trial.
And that includes everything from the most gruesome of the coroner's photographs, the impact on the victims, meaning in this case the victims' families.
It is always a danger to try your case in the press and to take your evidence outside of the courtroom.
Defense attorney Tony Alexander understands the defense's strategy. He's been involved in 10 death penalty trials. Even though there is a rule of professional conduct that limits what lawyers can say, Alexander says in this case, he would have asked for the gag order as well.
I think it leaves a broad area for everyone's own interpretation. I mean, what one lawyer may feel is close to the line or going over the line, another one may not feel the same way about it.
Judge Weisberg has kept a tight lid on this case from the very beginning, barring cameras in the courtroom, and it appears he will keep it out of the media spotlight until the end.
Unable to reach
unanimous verdicts.
2 years and 2 months ago, Lyle and Eric Menendez went from a step away from freedom.
The jury has found both the brothers, Lyle and Eric Menendez, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy.
To one step away from California's death chamber. What went right for the prosecution? Legal analysts say one of Judge Stanley Weisberg's rulings may have taken away those keys to freedom.
The biggest issue in the whole case is that the court, Judge Weisberg, did not permit the kind of psychiatric testimony during the second trial that he permitted during the first trial.
The judge wouldn't allow the controversial imperfect self-defense theory. In the first trial, both brothers confessed to the murders, but said they acted in self-defense after years of physical, mental, and sexual abuse.
He would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
But Judge Weisberg rejected that theory in the second trial, leading to a harsh reaction from defense attorney Leslie Abramson, who felt he was biased.
Surprised he doesn't just take out a rifle in the courtroom and shoot him.
That wasn't the only thing that went wrong for the defense. In the first trial, prosecutor Pam Bozanich told the jury even if the brothers were sexually abused, they still committed murder.
There is no theory by which you can acquit this defendant.
But the defense may have met its match in prosecutor David Kahn in the second trial. He challenged the abuse, raising doubts that it ever happened.
In the second trial, Kahn was very, very much prepared not only to deal with the psychiatric issue by saying to the judge, don't let it in, but he was not even going to concede that, in fact, the Menendez brothers were abused.
But in the second trial, Kahn had the advantage Bozanich couldn't, and that's basically a dress rehearsal. The first trial gave prosecutors the insight into almost every twist and turn by the defense, and they may have used it to turn near freedom for the Menendez brothers into a possible death sentence.
Return now to tonight's top story. Eric and Lyle Menendez have become notorious, infamous rich kids who brutally murdered their parents in cold blood. Others see them as victims themselves, traumatized by years of abuse at the hands of their parents. We return live now to Brian Jenkins outside the Men's Central Jail where the Menendez brothers are being held. Brian?
Well, Tony, for those very reasons, this case has become a legal dogfight. For nearly 6 years, prosecutors and defense attorneys have waged war over every letter of the law relating to the murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez and the motives of Lyle and Eric.
Can you answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, was you telling Lyle what?
My dad had been molesting me.
Eric Menendez cried on the stand in his and brother Lyle's first double murder trial 2 years ago, and his lawyer says he's been even more compelling in their second trial. Testifying alone this time, he told the jury how the brothers lived in fear of their father, entertainment mogul Jose Menendez, how he sexually abused them, and how they ultimately murdered their father and mother, believing they had to kill or be killed.
I thought he was going to kill me that night, and I thought he was going to have sex with me first.
Prosecutor David Kahn called Eric a liar, arguing that Eric and Lyle killed their parents to inherit the $14 million family fortune. As in the first trial, DAs brought in a Menendez uncle and a family lawyer, sparking a hot debate over whether Lyle had attempted to change the will his father had cut the brothers out of. Former friends testified about incriminating letters and comments made after the first trial, and allegations that the Menendezes tried to get witnesses to lie for them in court. Faced with having to answer those allegations, most of them directed at him, Lyle Menendez, star witness in the first trial, decided this time not to take the witness stand. So the DA played up the murder scene, for weeks keeping gruesome pictures of it in front of the jury, and while they watched, playing audio-taped confessions the brothers made to their psychiatrist shortly after the murders.
Yeah, it's correct. But no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Eric's consent. I didn't even want to influence him in that issue. I just let him sleep on it in a couple days.
Prosecutors introduced a new animated reconstruction of the murders, which the defense tried to shoot down with its own experts, but the defense took the biggest hits. Judge Weisberg put strict limits on the brothers' incest and abuse evidence and ruled they could not argue the murders were justifiable because, according to Eric's own testimony, neither he nor Lyle were in imminent danger when they shot and killed their parents. That one concept of whether the brothers felt they were in imminent danger has been at the heart of the case since the very beginning, and it is likely to be at the heart of the appeal when that takes place. I'm Brian Jenkins reporting live from the LA County Jail. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Brian. With us again, our trial consultant and Menendez case expert, Bob Moran, and also joining us tonight is jury consultant Richard Green. He has been studying, actually, the O.J. Simpson jury as well as the Menendez jury. Let me ask you, Mr. Green, first of all, if the second jury in the Menendez case had an easier job than the first jury.
Well, obviously by the results they did, because they were able to reach a decision relatively quickly. And I think it was much easier because they didn't have to wade through all of the additional witnesses and all of the additional theories that Leslie Abramson wanted them to have to deal with.
Okay, let's go now to you, our viewers on the phones. We'll take some of your questions about the case or the verdict from you. First, we're going to go to Lorena, who is in San Gabriel. Welcome.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
Okay, I want to ask a question. I wanted to know why it took so long to convict them when they confessed, and shouldn't the abuse have been hearsay since the parents weren't here to defend themselves?
Bobby, why don't you take that one?
Well, I think it, of course, to most people, it seemed like a slam dunk case. I mean, the brothers admitted that they killed their parents, but under our legal system, you're allowed to put on a defense and present the circumstances that are behind a dysfunctional family, as this family was.
And what's relevant in this case is what we call mens rea, which is what was going on inside of Lyle and Eric's brain at the time that they committed the crime. If, in fact, there were certain things then that would be allowable, for example, if they really felt honestly, subjectively, that they were in threat of their lives, that they were going to be killed, they could be completely acquitted. But on the other hand, if they premeditated it and thought about it well in advance, the first-degree murder charge is what would they be guilty of, and they were.
All right, next on the line is Soka from Redondo Beach. Soka, good evening.
Yes, hi. My question is, what are going to be the grounds for appeal for this verdict?
Did you hear that, Richard?
The grounds of appeal, I mean, usually, first, every decision that the judge, in this case, Judge Weisberg, made is subject to being overturned on appeal. And if it's critical, if it makes a big difference in how the ultimate decision was in the case, the whole thing could be sent down to be retried again. So every decision he made to exclude evidence, to include evidence, to exclude witnesses, to include witnesses, everything is going to be in a trial, in an appeal brief that the Court of Appeal is going to have to look at.
Okay, Cleveland in South Central LA, your question?
Yes, my question is, why was the judge allowed to take things out of the case that was tried in the first trial and wasn't introduced in the second trial? And, isn't that kind of unfair because we're giving a new jury the same thing that was presented before that the second jury didn't get to hear?
Why is that, Bob?
Well, the reason that the jury did not hear the exact same evidence in this case is that the prosecutors this time around, it was a new prosecution team that replaced the original pair of prosecutors. They were much more aggressive. They challenged the defense at every turn. They just did all they could to keep the defense from putting on some of the same witnesses. In fact, I think the only witnesses that they didn't challenge from the defense were Eric and Lyle Menendez themselves.
All right. Sean from Downey is on the line right now. Sean?
I'm wondering if the defense should have been based more on whether or not it was like spousal abuse, battered wife syndrome, and if that should have been their basis for defense.
Well, perhaps you should have contacted Leslie before today to include that in her defense. I think that's a bit of a stretch, and quite honestly, I think most people would agree, and obviously the jury did, that any of their defenses were a little bit on the stretching side, and that, in fact, what these kids did is they had a plan, and they murdered their parents, and obviously they were meant to pay for that.
Now to San Pedro and Olivia. Hi.
Yes?
What's your question?
Yes, I'd like to know how soon are they going to find out if they're going to get the death penalty or life in prison?
Well, the trial will now enter what's called the penalty phase, in which the defense will present many witnesses, many of the teachers, coaches, family, and friends that they weren't allowed to put on in the trial. And the defense says they expect that to last several months. The prosecution can come back after the defense and put on rebuttal witnesses. So we're probably looking at 2 months until we have some kind of resolution.
And this is going to be, I think, really the interesting part of this case. Are these kids going to be sent to the gas chamber, or are they going to go away just for life imprisonment? And I think that the information that's going to come forward, the testimony that's going to come forward now in support of one or the other is going to be really, really fascinating.
That's true, and we're going to hear a lot of new information that has never come out publicly before, so it'll be interesting to follow.
On the line from Los Angeles is Robert. Robert, good evening.
Good evening. Yes, I would like to ask a question that now that they've been found guilty of a capital crime, will they enjoy the luxury of being in prison together, or will they be in separate prisons?
Well, I don't think being in prison is any kind of luxury at all, even if you're in the so-called penthouse section of the LA County Jail, which is really no different than the rest of the jail, except you're isolated from the general population. In California, usually brothers are allowed to stay together, and Lyle Menendez told me several days ago that he's hoping that the brothers will be able to stay together when they are sent to state prison.
All right. Let me go back to something you said to me off camera a little while, and we want to thank all of you for calling tonight, and we're sorry we couldn't get to some of you waiting, but we've just run out of time. But thank you very much. I want to talk about the influence you alluded to before we sat down and started this process. You said that the jury might have been influenced by the outcome of the O.J. Simpson trial. Explain that.
Well, absolutely. First of all, I think that living in Los Angeles, we are under this cloud that every single person who is tried for a major offense gets off with some wacky theory, and that jurors here are really flaky. And I think that that has built up to a point where jurors are sensitive about that. The other thing is, I don't think that they wanted to be, quite honestly, this is something that can in fact influence their decision making. They didn't want to be the butt of jokes on Jay Leno's monologue. Those are the kind of things that jurors have to go back, they have to face their neighbors, they have to face their family members, and they have to be proud about what they did. And I think that they felt that there was enough evidence here that they really needed to crack the whip and come back with the verdict that they did.
You know, it's interesting to me, and I wonder how this is going to play out with the penalty phase being so terribly important and coming up next. These jurors are not sequestered, and they're hearing all of this tonight, and there's been a lot of venom on the air today in various ways that you have to wonder how much it's going to influence them.
Well, that was what the gag order was about, trying to suppress all of that. But
they're hearing a lot of all the ancillary stuff.
And every single thing goes into making those decisions, and hopefully they will be wise and they'll be able to step back and look at the things that they're supposed to look at.
The reaction from Los Angeles District Attorney Gil Garcetti? A fist thrust into the air, a much-needed victory for the DA. But this case is still not over. The jury must return Monday to decide what penalty to recommend.
For Eric and Lyle Menendez, the options are life and death. The jury that convicted them must now decide whether they should be executed.
In terms of the prosecution's position, they are obviously taking a deep breath and ready to go into the second phase. Both sides, in essence, because this case was a retrial, let's remember that, were really prepared the first time around, so that it now takes a little bit of time, and they probably will be given a week to get their evidence together, or maybe a few days, depending upon what shape they're in, their witnesses are in, to appear in court. And they'll take a deep sigh on both sides and say, where do we go from here? And then start in fresh, just like it's a new proceeding in a sense, because the evidence they're going to hear from both sides may well be evidence that they have not heard before. They can take into consideration the evidence that was introduced at trial, but they're going to be hearing new material in terms of aggravation, that is, evidence that supports the death penalty.
Quite shocked to find that he...
Forensic psychiatrist William Vickery testified on behalf of Eric Menendez during the first Menendez murder trial.
He was such a passive, wimpy, hopeless mess.
But it's something he testified to last week during the penalty phase of the second trial that has placed Eric's attorney, Leslie Abramson, at the center of controversy and interrupted any further testimony. Dr. Vickery said attorney Abramson instructed him to delete portions from his notes taken during interviews with Eric. His testimony has thrown the penalty phase of this trial into a tailspin.
This is real damage, and in the death penalty phase, I find it hard to believe that she's actually going to be continuing in this case unless her client wants her.
So with legal problems facing not only the defendant, but also the defendant's lead attorney, Barry Levin, co-counsel for Eric Menendez, told Judge Weisberg, "We have problems of dire urgency and extreme privilege to discuss with the court." Levin, Abramson, and Eric Menendez were granted a closed-door hearing. It lasted all day long, leaving court observers speculating on what effect this could have.
Lyle Menendez's attorneys believe that this has damaged their client because all credibility may be damaged. Every attorney in the case who's representing a defendant may look like they perhaps engage in this kind of conduct.
Conduct that could have an impact on the jury and sway their decision on whether the brothers should receive life in prison or death by execution. She invoked her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination on Friday and did an about-face today. Attorney Leslie Abramson arrived at Van Nuys Superior Court not knowing if, by day's end, she would retain her position as lead attorney for Eric Menendez. Her legal problems began last week when psychiatrist William Vickery testified she told him to delete portions of his interviews with Eric Menendez. It prompted Barry Levin, co-counsel for Eric, and Charles Gessler, public defender for Lyle, to ask that Abramson be removed from the case, fearing the appearance of attorney misconduct would affect the jury's decision on whether the brothers should receive life in prison or death by execution for killing their parents. In the end, Eric decided Leslie must stay.
I think the relationship between Eric Menendez and Leslie Abramson is so close that it's inconceivable that Eric Menendez could be seated at the counsel table in the Menendez trial without Leslie Abramson at his side.
Author Robert Rand has been following the trial since the day after Kitty and Jose Menendez were killed.
Leslie Abramson has reparented Eric Menendez. She's become his surrogate mother. They're so close, it's unimaginable that they could be separated in this trial.
It's complicating the penalty phase of the trial, but with the decision allowing Leslie Abramson to leave court, keeping her position on the Menendez defense team.
10 years and 2 trials later, Lyle and Eric Menendez were formally sentenced today in Los Angeles for the brutal murders of their parents. Following the recommendation of the jury that convicted them, the judge gave the brothers life in prison without parole.
After Eric and Lyle Menendez are formally sentenced, they'll be transferred from LA's Men's Central Jail to one of 11 reception centers in California. While there, they'll be evaluated to determine which of the state's 8 maximum security facilities should house them for the rest of their lives. A Department of Corrections committee will consider a number of issues, including the seriousness of their crime, their mental and physical health, their education, their behavior while incarcerated, and the security needed to house them. The Menendez brothers say they want to be sent to the same prison. The Department of Corrections does make some attempt to keep family members together, but on the other hand, crime partners are usually separated. Since Eric and Lyle Menendez were convicted of working together to kill their parents, that issue will come into play. Dr. William Vickery has treated the Menendez brothers since 1990.
I think it would be adverse to their mental health if they were to be ripped apart at this point and placed in different institutions. I think they would both have a setback, that their mental condition would deteriorate, they would require more psychiatric treatment, there'd have to be an adjustment in their medications.
Dr. Rick Schumann, who counsels crime victims, disagrees. He feels the harshest punishment should be given.
They are being sent to prison for life to be punished. Whether or not they're more comfortable together isn't really the primary question. The question in my mind is what will be the most serious punishment for them? And for me, and in my mind, the concern for victims, they should be separated.
But Dr. Vickery says the tragedy of the Menendez family has taken a huge toll on the brothers' psychological well-being.
The Department of Corrections should have an interest in their mental stability. If they were to have a nervous breakdown and they were to hurt themselves.
They were once the image of such a picture-perfect family, brothers Lyle and Eric, parents Kitty and Jose. But that image of perfection was destroyed August 20th, 1989, when the brothers shot and killed their parents, claiming they were afraid their parents would kill them. The brothers, now 28 and 26 years old, will spend the rest of their lives behind bars, each formally sentenced by Judge Stanley Weisberg to 2 consecutive life terms for killing their parents.
It's very gratifying to see to what the justice was done in this case. I think that people throughout this country wondered why the defendants were not convicted in the first trial, given the strength of the evidence against them. So it is a personal victory, and I think it's a victory for justice as well.
Prosecutor Cotton calls the sentencing a personal victory, and the lead detective on the case is of the opinion that Lyle and Eric should not be housed in the same state prison.
The main reason I thought they should be separate is because they conspired to commit the crimes of committing the murders of their parents. And I was concerned about them conspiring to commit crimes within the facilities that they're housed in.
It's ridiculous to say that they shouldn't be together because they would commit other crimes. The probation report indicates they are not endangered or a threat to anyone. They have not committed any other crimes. They did not conspire over the 6 years they have been together in the same smaller institution, the county jail. And the probation department recommends that they can be kept together and that they will be an asset to any institution they are in.
For attorney Leslie Abramson, this is the end of the line for legal maneuvers on behalf of the Menendez brothers. She plans filing an appeal but will not represent the younger Menendez brother, Eric. It's unknown if she'll also step away from attempts at planning a courthouse or jail wedding between Lyle Menendez and his pen pal girlfriend, Anna Erickson, saying only,
"Y'all made sure that he didn't get married when he was supposed to, and I'm not going to tell you nothing." But I was told to be here, and here I am. Anna, how are you feeling?
It didn't surprise me. Anna is such a caring person. I think she likes to pick up the bird with the broken wing and take care of him. I don't know. I think she felt some attachment to him, maybe because of the problems he had in his growing up life. I think she had some troubles in her life.
This private ceremony going to take place here without.
Yeah, no kidding. Where's she at? Just gotten back.
Relationship, I'm surprised she's going as far as to marry him. I think that's the part.
Okay.
Because she's a physical girl. She likes the contact. She's a people person. So how can you be married to someone that you can't be around? She can't be with him unless it's enough for her over the phone. I don't know.
It was canceled because of a disagreement between two judges. The next day, the brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They immediately filed an appeal.
I believe, what was it, 6 years ago? 4 people died that day, because those two guys don't exist anymore. Whoever they were, they're sure not there today.
Have been saved from the death penalty. A Los Angeles jury is recommending the two brothers be given life without parole. The same jury earlier convicted them of the 1989 murder of their wealthy parents. The panel saved the Menendez brothers' lives because, as one juror said, quote, there were other good things about them. Los Angeles jury recommended life in prison without parole for Eric and Lyle Menendez. The jury rejected the death penalty for the brothers who were convicted of murdering their parents. Reed Galen reports on the final phase of the case.
In court, relatives of Eric and Lyle Menendez gasped with relief when the sentencing verdicts were announced. There would be no death penalty. Perhaps the jury was swayed by testimony of some relatives who said there had already been enough killing in the Menendez family.
Leslie, would you call this a win for the defense?
Oh, man, what's a win? You know, that they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison.
The verdict of the jury today, the sentence of life imprisonment, justice has now been served.
The brothers were convicted of killing their parents in cold blood. They ambushed Kitty and Jose Menendez in their Beverly Hills home, repeatedly shooting them with shotguns at point-blank range.
He did what he wanted to me, and I couldn't stop that.
Eric and Lyle said a life of abuse made them fear for their own lives, and the first trial ended with no verdict. But 2 years later, the brothers' fate is apparently settled. They've already spent 6 years behind bars. Now they will spend the rest of their lives there with no possibility of parole. Jurors offered their feelings.
There's no way we could put them to death.
We did think there was psychological abuse to some extent. I think most of us believed that.
The jury's sentencing verdict is a recommendation only. The judge could order something different, but not the death penalty. The judge set a date in July to pronounce sentence and hear defense motions for yet another new trial. Reed Galen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
6 years ago, Eric and Lyle Menendez were arrested for killing their parents. Yesterday, a jury in Los Angeles recommended life in prison for the brothers. A judge's sentence comes later. Correspondent Reed Galen reports on the crime and the punishment.
After 3 weeks of impassioned debate in the penalty phase of their trial, Eric and Lyle Menendez will not face the death penalty. Defense attorney Leslie Abramson was philosophical.
Oh, man, what's a win? You know, that they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison.
So was LA District Attorney Gil Garcetti.
We believe
that most people in this county, perhaps even in this country, now believe that there was justice in this case.
They were convicted on March 20th of killing their parents in cold blood. The brothers ambushed Kitty and Jose Menendez in their Beverly Hills home, repeatedly shooting them with shotguns at point-blank range.
The streets don't run. I shot her close.
The brothers claimed a life of abuse made them fear for their own lives, and the first trial ended with no verdict. But this retrial was different. Television cameras were not permitted in court, and the abuse defense was much more limited by the judge. The brothers' fate is finally settled now, but famous defense attorney Leslie Abramson faces unfinished business. She's accused of ordering an important witness, a psychiatrist, to change his testimony. And though she was allowed to continue representing Eric Menendez through the sentencing, Abramson now faces an investigation and possible loss of her license. As for the brothers, the jury may have been swayed by relatives who asked that their lives at least be spared, because as one witness said, there's been enough death in the Menendez family already. Reed Galen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Cases in years. Lyle and Eric Menendez armed themselves with shotguns, then blew away their wealthy parents in their Beverly Hills home. When the first trial ended with hung juries, they were tried again. Again, the brothers said self-defense. The state said greed. Today, Reed Galen reports the jury said guilty of murder in the first degree.
There were no TV cameras in court when Eric and Lyle Menendez finally heard 12 citizens render judgment.
Said was guilty on all counts with special circumstances.
That means the death penalty is possible because the jury believed the brothers did kill their parents with malice and forethought, completely rejecting the notion that the killings were a pardonable conclusion to a life of abuse and torture. Prosecutors said it was really about inheriting the family's millions. The brothers were impassive as the verdicts were announced.
There were no reactions whatsoever, none whatsoever. There were no expressions, there was not a sound.
There never was any doubt how Jose and Kitty Menendez died. He was killed by a point-blank shotgun blast in the back of the head. She was shot and then shot again in the face as she lay on the floor. At the first trial, defense attorneys painted a vivid picture of molestation, abuse, and psychological trench warfare in the family's Beverly Hills mansion. The brothers were so beaten down and scared of their parents that they finally took shotguns into their own hands, the defense said, in a lethal preemptive strike.
I ran around and shot my mom.
Lyle and Eric had separate juries at that first trial, and neither could come to a verdict. Live television coverage of that trial turned the defendants into macabre celebrities, and for many critics, poster boys of a permissive criminal justice system. In this second trial, which began last August, the defense was much more limited in what it could present.
Almost everything Judge Weisberg did helped the prosecution the second time around, especially limiting the defense abuse evidence. As a result, Gil Garcetti has now won a case that he needed to win.
And D.A. Garcetti was clearly jubilant, though he and all trial participants are still under a gag order. 6.5 years after that bloody night here at the Menendez family home, the jury now takes up the question of whether Eric and Lyle should be executed. This last phase of the trial could involve dozens of witnesses and may last a few more months. Reed Galen, CBS News, Beverly Hills.
Writer Dominic Dunn, an old friend of this broadcast, is an expert on the Menendez case. He literally wrote the book on it. Dominic was in the courtroom today when the verdict was read a short time ago. We got his perspective on the case. Dominic, you were in the courtroom when the verdict was read, no cameras allowed in the courtroom. What was it like?
There was no gasping, no crying out, no overt tears from everyone. There was simply silence in the courtroom. And that is true also of both Eric and Lyle Menendez. They did not look at each other at that time. They all remained impassive.
Two juries could not reach a verdict in the first trial. A single jury did reach a verdict this time. What was the difference?
They had a new prosecution team that did an absolutely wonderful job. And I think the main thing that they did was to mock the sexual abuse that the defense has used as its main cornerstone, because in all probability that never happened.
Effective any that the O.J. Simpson trial had on this?
I think the O.J. Simpson trial had an enormous effect on this. I think there was such an outcry that someone whom everyone felt was guilty walked. I think that they were, that this city there would have been a riot out here or something if the Menendez brothers had a hung jury. I think that everyone knew, I mean, they had confessed that they did it, and there had to be a verdict this time, and the verdict came.
Dominic Dunn, thank you.
Personally, I think it's a good thing we finally got a verdict in this case. I think that Leslie Abramson, in particular on behalf of Eric Menendez, may have a pretty decent appellate argument after the sentencing on the issue of whether the judge, in fact, cut her case or gutted her case.
The legal part is over, but the human part continues.
This is UPN News 13.
Tonight, the verdict. Lyle and Eric Menendez guilty. A live report from our Brian Jenkins. We'll also have reaction tonight from across the Southland. That story from our Sasha Fu. We'll be revisiting the crime scene, the brothers' 911 telephone call, and how they were caught. You're going to hear from the case's foremost expert, our Robert Rand, who reveals the turning point that decided the verdict. Plus, we'll hear from jury expert Richard Green, and we'll be taking your phone calls.
Hello again and welcome to a special edition of UPN News 13. I'm Bob Jimenez.
And I'm Tawny Little. Guilty. That's the verdict for the brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez. 12 jurors convicted them of first-degree murder for the 1989 shotgun slayings of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. That same jury will now decide whether the brothers should die for their crimes. Our team coverage begins tonight with Brian Jenkins live at the Men's Central Jail where the brothers are being held. Brian?
Tawny, 6 years Eric and Lyle Menendez have lived here at the LA County Jail, and according to those close to them, both brothers were convinced that after today they'd leave here free men. Well, they were disappointed in a decision that, for a brief moment in time, captivated the world around them.
Shortly before 12:30 this afternoon, a strange hush fell over the Van Nuys courthouse as crowds of curious onlookers waited for the verdict in the murder trial of Eric and Lyle Menendez.
It was guilty on all counts with special circumstances. A penalty phase of the trial is scheduled to begin on Monday.
Guilty verdicts on first-degree murder got little reaction from either Eric, Lyle, or anyone else in the courtroom.
It was the strangest thing. It was total silence in the courtroom.
Well, as soon as the jury walked in, there was no eye contact made with either of the brothers, so it was pretty obvious to me as a lawyer that it was going to be a guilty verdict.
I was shocked. Even though I sort of expected it, because it was premeditated.
Norma Novelli, whose taped jailhouse conversations with Lyle were fought over for evidence, says neither brother ever thought they'd be convicted of first-degree murder.
Lyle always thinks he was going to get manslaughter. That's what they always thought. Plus, you know, manslaughter's just a few years, and then they do half the time. And so I think they thought they were practically going to be walking.
Inside, a dejected Leslie Abramson after losing what's been a very personal 6-year battle for Eric Menendez. Outside, Deputy DA David Kahn forced to hold back any comments about his hard-won victory because of a gag order issued by the judge. That order muzzles anyone associated with the case who may be called to testify in the penalty phase. That's where the jury will decide whether Eric and Lyle Menendez will get life in prison or the death penalty. Now, the death penalty is applicable because the jury found what's called special circumstances, meaning they believe the murders were carried out in such a cold, calculated, and brutal manner that both Eric and Lyle Menendez should be candidates for execution. I'm Brian Jenkins reporting live from the LA County Jail. Back to you, Bob.
All right, Brian, thanks very much. It was that judge's gag order that prevented anyone involved in this case from commenting on today's verdict, including District Attorney Gil Garcetti. But as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. After a string of losses in a lot of high-profile cases, Mr. Garcetti couldn't contain his happiness. And with less than a week before elections, the timing couldn't be better for him.
Well, there's no gag order on the rest of us here in the Southland, so now we're going to get some street reaction to today's verdict. Our team coverage continues with Sasha Fu live in Burbank at the Media District Mall. Sasha?
Tony, most everyone seems to be familiar with the Menendez case, probably since the first trial was televised. So although there were no cameras allowed in this retrial, today's guilty verdicts brought a strong and swift reaction in the court of public opinion.
I think it was a just verdict.
They got what O.J. Simpson didn't.
I think it was pretty harsh.
I'm not surprised that they found him guilty for pretending to take the, expecting to take the money and not, it wasn't over the abuse.
They got what they deserve.
And what do convicted killers Lyle and Eric Menendez deserve? Our jury from the streets seemed divided on the question of life or death.
I think death would be considered mercy as opposed to life in prison.
They should, go to prison for what they did. I don't think that they should be killed.
I believe they should get the death penalty.
They should suffer just like their parents did when what they did to their parents. Instead of suffering a little bit, they should suffer a whole lot and realize what they did.
I felt a lot of sympathy for them.
And it may be that sympathy factor which will save Lyle and Eric Menendez from death by lethal injection. At least in polling our jury from the streets, we found that those who believed the brothers' tales of incest and abuse did not want to see the state of California take their lives. We're live in Burbank. I'm Sasha Fu, UPN News 13.
All right, Sasha, thanks very much. It has been a long road for the Menendez brothers and all those involved in this heinous crime. How Kitty and Jose Menendez died was shocking in itself. The arrest of their sons was the stunner.
August 20th, 1989, a quiet late summer evening in Beverly Hills. Shortly after 10 p.m., neighbors along North Elm Drive hear a series of rapid-fire popping sounds. At 11:47, Beverly Hills police answer a frantic 911 call.
What's the problem? What's the problem? Someone killed my parents. Pardon me? Someone killed. What? Who? Are they still there? Yes. The people. No.
When the first patrol car pulls up 2 minutes later, Eric Menendez is curled up in a ball, weeping hysterically on the front lawn.
I've never seen anything like it. Never will see anything like it. Probably the hardest thing I'll probably ever have to. They weren't real. They didn't. They wax. They looked like wax. It's something that I've never seen my dad helpless.
The brothers tell police they've discovered their parents' bodies after returning home from seeing the latest James Bond thriller, License to Kill. 5 blasts from a 12-gauge shotgun hit Jose Menendez, including a contact wound that leaves a grapefruit-sized hole in the back of his head. Kitty Menendez is torn apart by 9 shots.
I think that possibly if Lyle and I would have been home, if we would have been able to do something about it, maybe my dad would be alive. I definitely would give my life for my dad's.
Beverly Hills averages 2 murders a year. In a few brief moments, 1989's quota has been reached. 45-year-old Jose Menendez was a talented, tough-minded show business exec. When he left Cuba at 16, he was penniless. He made a fortune in Hollywood as CEO of Live Entertainment, a major home video distributor.
So the company is broad-based and it provides pretty much what the consumer wants.
47-year-old Kitty Menendez was a former small-town beauty queen who met her future husband at a college debating class. Initial speculation focused on 2 companies Live Entertainment had recently bought from owners with alleged mob ties.
Unfortunately, he thought clean business is clean business, and he forgot that not necessarily the mafia accepts that.
This man is one of the finest men I have ever known.
But the Menendez murders didn't make the cover of People magazine until 7 months later. In a shocking development, Jose and Kitty Menendez's sons were arrested and accused of murdering their parents.
The motives, of course, are varied. It's no big secret that the Menendezes had an estate that was worth millions of dollars.
How many millions?
And then, of course, who knows what really goes on within a family.
Even though they expected to be acquitted, the brothers did tell close friends that they were prepared to accept any decision of the jury, a jury tonight that may now send Eric and Lyle to their deaths.
Joining us in our studio is a man who's been closely following the Menendez brothers since the murders. Bob Rand is an author and UPN News 13's trial consultant, and obviously a very different outcome this time, Bob.
A very different outcome, Tony. The conclusion of the second trial may have been foreshadowed before opening statements were ever delivered last October. This time, LA County prosecutors challenged the defense at every turn.
They called it the abuse excuse defense, but this was not a molestation trial. Jurors were faced with a basic legal question. Were Eric and Lyle Menendez in fear of being killed at the moment they emptied 2 12-gauge shotguns into the bodies of their parents? In Menendez 2, the brothers were tried together, not by separate juries as in the first trial. In the wake of the O.J. Simpson trial, Judge Stanley Weisberg banned TV cameras from the courtroom. Prosecutors brought in Roger McCarthy, an engineer who presented a shot-by-shot reconstruction of the crime scene. Day after day, bloody pictures of Jose and Kitty Menendez were displayed on a big screen. The defense successfully challenged the presentation with their own experts, but the damage was done. Murder is never pretty, said Leslie Abramson outside the courthouse, and this was an exceptionally brutal crime scene. But the biggest change in the second trial was who the jury didn't see.
You break me.
Lyle Menendez, so compelling that even the strongest prosecution supporters had momentary doubts, did not take the witness stand. Eric Menendez, a stronger witness than the first trial, tried to carry the burden for both brothers. Jurors also didn't hear from over 40 teachers, coaches, and family friends who appeared at Menendez 1.
The judge just whittles away at our defense, makes it smaller and smaller and smaller, and then when it gets so tiny, he says, well, that's not worth very much, and tosses it away. It's unbelievable.
For the defense, it was a crippling decision. But the harshest blow came on the final day of the trial when Judge Stanley Weisberg ruled that jurors could not consider a manslaughter conviction for Kitty Menendez as they had in the first trial. Leslie Abramson angrily declared in court that she had been incompetent in representing her client and wanted that on the record. Outside the courthouse, she angrily spoke with reporters.
You know, enough already. Surprised he doesn't just take out a rifle in the courtroom and shoot him.
And you blame it on the fact.
In the past few days, Lyle Menendez told me he was hoping for a second-degree murder conviction. He thought Eric's jury might hang. Lyle Menendez also told me that the brothers are hoping to stay together if they are sent to state prison.
Okay. Bob, we'll see you later in the show.
Okay.
Millions of Americans got to watch the trials of O.J. Simpson, William Kennedy Smith, and the Menendez brothers on TV.
Also, judges who face re-election may not want to appear soft on crime, and so they bend over backwards to rule against defendants. After the first trial in the Menendez brothers case, the judge emasculated the defense in the second trial after public opinion polls showed that most people thought that the brothers were guilty after having watched their first trial on television.